Hello, and welcome to a fresh new episode of a Dynamic CIO Talk Show. In this show, we invite technology leaders, strategists, and architects to talk about the future of digital and the future of technology. Uh, Oracle last week announced that its revolutionary MySQL Heatwave, which is a fully managed database service that lets developers quickly develop and deploy secure cloud-native applications, which was launched last year, now supports in-database machine learning. This new integration will help customers to securely use real-time data without the complexity, latency, and cost of ETL duplication. The Heatwave ML fully automates the ML lifecycle and stores all trained models inside the MySQL database, eliminating the need to move them to a machine learning tool or service using data movers and connectors. With this launch, Oracle claims that it has become the only cloud database vendor to have such advanced ML capabilities inside a database. For the first time in the industry, Oracle also published ML benchmarks formed across a large number of publicly available classification and regression datasets. On average, Heatwave ML trains models 25 times faster at 1% of the cost of Redshift ML and scales with cluster size. MySQL Heatwave customers can now train models more often and keep them updated for increased prediction accuracy. But to talk about this and many other issues, I would now like to invite Nipun Agarwal, who is the Senior Vice President, MySQL DB and Heatwave at Oracle Corporation, who's joining me from the US. Welcome to the talk show, Nipun. How are you doing?
Thank you, Rahul, for the opportunity. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm pretty well too. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So please, before we get into the depth of the subject and the new releases and the innovations, talk a little about yourself, your role, your expertise, and the current focus areas of work and innovations.
Sure. So I'm a Senior Vice President at Oracle, and I manage the MySQL database in Heatwave. And prior to this, for about 10 years, I was managing various projects in the area of data processing, machine learning, cloud computing, security in Oracle Labs, which is the research arm of Oracle. And prior to that, for about 15 years, I was managing different projects in the Oracle database group. So my journey has been pretty straightforward. I have a master's in computer science. And since then, for almost the last 27 years, I've been with Oracle. And the areas of interest are machine learning, large-scale data processing, cloud computing, and security. And over the last several years, we have had many technology breakthroughs, which are now embedded as a part of the MySQL Heatwave offering.
Excellent. It's great to know the depth of knowledge that you have and your longevity in Oracle itself. So MySQL is arguably the most popular open source database solution today, even though the Postgres, MongoDB, SQLite are gaining popularity. They are a distant second, third, and fourth options. What makes MySQL stay at the top of the chart and the top choice for developers?
Right. So you're right. MySQL is by far the most popular open source database. Not just that, even in the cloud, it is the most popular open source database, right? So as you said, there are a lot of competitors, including Postgres, but in terms of popularity, MySQL is the most popular. And there are multiple reasons for that. One of them is, for instance, it is extremely simple to use, right? And most of the developers and people who love the open source community like the ease of use, and by far MySQL is the simplest to use. The second thing which I would say is it's 100% based on standards. So there is absolutely no proprietary extension. And the third, and perhaps the most important one I would say, is that it's been around for about 30 years. And the MySQL development team has taken feedback from customers very seriously, and they have been incorporating the feedback into the open source product. So when customers find that, okay, there is something which is missing, they provide feedback, and then that gets incorporated. That really builds trust like in the team. And that's probably, I would say, the biggest reason why MySQL has grown to be so popular. And enterprises around the world like use it for all kinds of applications, which we are very encouraged about.
No wonder that Oracle has thrown its weight behind MySQL because of its popularity and trust among the larger enterprise users. So it would only be logical to talk about Oracle MySQL Heatwave, the in-memory query accelerator with built-in machine learning. I would now like to ask you about its key capabilities and how they translate into benefit to its adopters.
Right. MySQL Heatwave is a fully managed MySQL-based service offered by Oracle. So as you probably know, MySQL as a managed service is offered by pretty much every cloud you can think of, right? Like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Alibaba, right? You name it. MySQL Heatwave is the managed service from Oracle for MySQL. There are a couple of capabilities which make it very unique, which is that MySQL has traditionally been designed and optimized for transactional processing. So when customers of MySQL had to run analytics, they would need to take the data out of the MySQL database into some other database for running analytics. Now with this, customers would end up with two different databases. There would be some latency involved in moving the data from MySQL to this other database. There would be cost involved, and then the complexity of the application, because now the application has to deal with two different databases. Heatwave is an in-memory query accelerator for MySQL, and it has been built inside MySQL by enhancing MySQL. As a result, customers of MySQL Heatwave now have a single database with which they can do both transactional processing as well as analytics. So there is no need to extract the data, single database, and all existing tools and applications which are compatible with MySQL continue to work as is. And then I'm sure we'll talk more. One of the main selling points of MySQL Heatwave is that it is extremely fast. In fact, it's the fastest service we have benchmarked compared to like many of the databases for analytics at a very, very low price. Right? So it makes it a single database, no change to the application, extremely fast, and a lower price compared to any other database offering.
Excellent. It's quite a satisfactory reply that you have given. The MySQL database service with Heatwave is available globally in all the 37 regions that Oracle has. How does it help the developers and the enterprise users?
Right. So if there are customers of MySQL or users of MySQL, whether they are running the community edition or they're running the enterprise edition, whether they are on-premise or whether they are running on some other cloud or some derivative of MySQL. For instance, you mentioned MariaDB or like, Aurora. These are all like, derivatives of like MySQL. Those customers are now able to try MySQL Heatwave on their application, and they by themselves are able to measure what is the improvement in performance they get and what are the cost savings they get. So this has enabled a very large segment of customers to try and test it for themselves because it is 100% MySQL. And so it's very easy for people to try and evaluate what is the performance and the cost benefits they're getting.
Great. So now let us come to the key topic of this conversation. Oracle last week announced MySQL Heatwave machine learning, which will help the developers to build powerful ML capabilities into their applications. Oracle also makes a very tall claim that Heatwave ML is 25 times faster than Amazon Redshift machine learning, which is at 1% of the cost, or Snowflake for that matter. You also published some benchmarks. I would like to ask and understand from you how scientific are those benchmarks? Is this another form of cloud war that we are expecting? Explain to us how it works.
Right. So let's first talk about Redshift ML, and then we'll get to the benchmarks, right? Redshift
Sure.
ML and Heatwave ML. Just like the way I was describing for analytics, similarly, when customers of a database want to run machine learning with solutions like, whether it's Redshift or other databases, customers need to extract the data out of the database and then use some service for running, for doing machine learning processing. With Heatwave ML, we have now augmented the MySQL Heatwave service to be able to run machine learning processing inside the database. And when I say machine learning processing, I mean training, inference, and explanation. So the advantage is the same advantage I was talking about earlier with analytics. Customers don't need to move the data. On the same instance, the same cluster, with the same service, customers can now run OLTP, analytics, as well as machine learning. And this has, like, again, the same benefits like security, because now the data as well as the machine learning models are secured by the same access control mechanisms of the database as the rest of the data. Now, when it comes to the benchmarks and the performance, the thing to realize is that training is the most expensive phase of the machine learning processing, right, by far. It takes the most amount of time, but it is a very important phase of machine learning because the models which are generated by training influence the quality of the prediction. So if you don't train your models well, it is going to impact the quality or the accuracy of your predictions. That's why most of our customers employ data scientists to help with the training process. So the two aspects are A, it's very time consuming, and B, typically people need expertise to do a good job. With Heatwave ML, we have completely automated the process. There is absolutely no user intervention required. And secondly, it is extremely fast. The reason it is significantly faster than the competition is because we have spent like many years of research into developing new algorithms, for instance, for algorithm selection, for hyperparameter tuning, for feature selection, for like intelligence way to sample the data. As a result of this, the performance is significantly faster. Now, in terms of the cost, the interesting thing is that customers of MySQL Heatwave don't need to pay anything additional to run machine learning. It just comes by default for free. But if a customer were to provision a Heatwave cluster just for running machine learning, even then, it is just 1% of the cost of Redshift ML. And the reason is because in the case of Redshift ML, customers need to have a Redshift cluster, and then Redshift makes call to SageMaker or other services to do machine learning processing. So customers are paying for the cost of Redshift and the cost of some of the service. With Heatwave ML, all this processing is happening inside MySQL Heatwave, and there is no additional cost. So those are the three things. One, it is fully automated. Secondly, it's significantly faster because we have augmented each stage of the auto machine learning processing with like new intelligence and new algorithms. And third, since it's being done inside the database, there is no additional charge. And that's why it's a much lower priced compared to the competition.
So the explanation that you gave makes it quite distinct, and I can understand, and also the listeners can understand the difference between the Redshift and the Oracle Heatwave ML offering. Now, to reap the benefits of a Heatwave in the real sense, it needs to be connected to an analytics platform, be it a Tableau or any other analytics platform, be it Click or SAS. Firstly, does it work with a preferred set of analytics platform for my understanding, for the understanding of the listeners, or for its optimum use, is it necessary to have Oracle Analytics Cloud to reap the maximum benefits of Heatwave ML?
Okay, so the first thing to note is that Heatwave is designed and optimized for cloud processing. So it only runs in the cloud. So MySQL Heatwave is currently offered in the Oracle Cloud, and very soon we will be offering it in other clouds as well. But it only runs in the cloud, not on-premise, because that's what it's been designed for. Now, that said, in order to connect to MySQL Heatwave, MySQL Heatwave is 100% compatible, or it's 100% like, MySQL. So any client which can talk or connect to MySQL can also connect to MySQL Heatwave. Right? So all the examples of some of the tools you gave, for instance, Tableau, Looker, OBIE, they all are applications or tools which connect seamlessly with MySQL Heatwave, which means that if someone is like doing some navigation or is doing some kind of like, building a report in Tableau, if they are connected to MySQL, when the query is sent to MySQL Heatwave, the execution will happen in MySQL Heatwave, and it's completely seamless.
Excellent. Along with this launch of MySQL Heatwave ML, Oracle also released additional innovations, which includes real-time elasticity, data compression, and pause and resume functions. Now, how do they make Heatwave a more compelling tool for the developers and for the enterprise users?
Right. So one of the very marquee characteristics of MySQL Heatwave is that it's a very scalable system, meaning that as you add more nodes to a Heatwave cluster, the performance of the cluster improves almost linearly with the number of nodes which have been added. Now, as a result of this capability, a lot of our existing customers, they start off with a cluster for some size, and then based on the workload, they add more nodes or they reduce the number of nodes. But this process of adding more nodes or reducing the number of nodes has to be done manually. And during this operation of resize, the cluster was not available. With the support for real-time elasticity, customers can resize to any number of nodes, and the operation is fully automated. Furthermore, while the operation of resize is going on, this cluster is completely available for queries, for DMLs, for loading of data. So what we have done is we have fully automated the resize operation, plus we have improved the availability because the cluster is not down at all. This is very distinct and differentiated from other capabilities of like other services like Redshift. In the case of Redshift, it takes almost 10 to 15 minutes to do the resize. And during that period of time, the cluster is not available for writes or even reads. And then after the processing is done, the user needs to manually balance the system. In the case of Heatwave, not only is it automated and available, at the end of the operation, all the nodes have about the same amount of data, which helps the query processing or the query performance. Right? So that's about the real-time elasticity. So this will enable customers who want to have different amount of computation based on their workloads, get a very seamless experience without any downtime. So that's the business benefit.
Excellent.
Right.
Please go
Then
on.
the next thing you talked about, or you wanted to ask about, was about processing more data per node. Now, as I mentioned, that even like with the launch we had like last year, we had shown how Heatwave is significantly faster and significantly lower price compared to the competition. Now, we got feedback from a lot of the customers because MySQL customers are very cost sensitive. They said, hey, can we trade off some performance for even lower cost? And that's exactly what we did. The size of the cluster determines the cost to the user, and the size of the cluster is dependent upon how much of the data user has and how much data can be processed per node. In this release, we announced that we have now doubled the amount of data that can be processed per node, which means users need a cluster of half the size, which means their cost goes down by half. So we are able to cut down the cost by half without impacting the price performance, right? Price performance remains the same, but the cost goes down by half. And this is because of the software innovations we have done by compressing the data and also reducing the amount of intermediate memory, which is required by queries. So that's the next announcement. And then the third bit was about additional benchmarks. And there in the past, we have shown performance results of PPCH for the various different data sizes. And this time we announced results of PPCDS, which has more complex queries, more complex schema, data skew. And when we did the comparison with Redshift, Snowflake, Google BigQuery, Azure Synapse, once again, Heatwave is the fastest service compared to any of these four services, and also significantly lower priced.
If I may also ask in the interim, what kind of industries can benefit more from this offering which Oracle has just launched?
Right. So the interesting thing is that the number one, well, okay, since the last release, right, it's been about like maybe 8 or 9 months. We
Yep.
have seen customers from all kinds of applications and services migrate. So we have customers from Aurora, from Redshift, from Snowflake, from Google BigQuery, SAP HANA, Teradata. Right? So we have had customers migrate from all these different databases to MySQL Heatwave, right? And it's a very broad set of industries where customers are migrating from. Now, the common thread in all of this is customers who are migrating, they've all had a mix of transaction processing and analytics. And that's what we call like mixed workloads. So they have transaction processing, at the same time, some complex queries or some aspects of decision making. Second thing was that these were customers who had at least some pain points with some queries, or they were not able to run more complex queries, or the queries were not scaling on their existing databases. And as they moved, what they found is a good side effect of this was that in addition to better performance and being able to run all the applications with one database, they also found that the cost had reduced. Right? But this is across the gamut of applications. So it's not to say that only the analytic customers, right, or the folks who are doing reporting are benefiting. This is even for customers of Aurora, customers of RDS MySQL. And that's because most of the times people are running a combination of transaction processing and some complex queries.
Okay, so my couple of my last questions. One emanates from what you just said, that the customers are migrating from different other platforms to Heatwave ML. Now, is the migration path a little difficult, challenging? How does Oracle help in that migration?
Right. No, the migration path is not difficult at all. In fact, the three reasons people give us why they are migrating to MySQL Heatwave, the number one is the ease of migration, because most of these services I talked about, right, like Aurora, it's API compatible with MySQL. So customers don't need to change their application at all. Right? So that's the biggest impediment otherwise for customers to migrate across databases. These databases like Aurora are API compatible with MySQL, so people can migrate without change of the application. And furthermore, if there are people who would like some assistance in terms of migrating the data across clouds, yes, we have many teams within Oracle and OCI who are able to assist customers, because some of the times when customers are migrating several terabytes of data, it is not just about that they want to use MySQL, they may want other services as well. And for that, yes, we have teams and consultants who can guide customers on what is the easiest way to migrate the data, and also how can they get equivalent capability with OCI as they're getting the existing on-premise environment or existing cloud services.
Excellent. That brings me to my final question, where I would like to talk about how the machine learning capabilities of Heatwave ML are put in for use. What I mean is, if you can give some examples of reference customers where it is implemented and what were the outcomes.
Sure. So I start off with one internal use case that in the previous launch, we had talked about MySQL Autopilot, right? And with that, we were the first MySQL-based database which had machine learning-based automation. So this is an internal use case, and I can talk in a little bit of detail as to what is the benefit to the customer. So with MySQL Autopilot, we look at the queries and the workload of the user. Right? So we are looking at the data, and we are looking at the queries of the user. Based on that, the system creates machine learning model. And based on the model, the system is able to predict that what is the right key on which the system should partition the data on. Further, the system is able to predict how many nodes the user needs to run their workload optimally. Now, if you look at other services, they expect the user to manually determine what are the number of nodes needed, or they expect the user to determine what is the right partitioning key. Right? So this is one example where internally we are able to provide a lot of value because it's based on machine learning prediction. Another example I can give you is that one of the very large automakers, they are users of MySQL Heatwave. They store lot, like tens of terabytes of data in MySQL Heatwave, and they would extract the data out of MySQL Heatwave, and they would take it to some machine learning pre-processing, and they would do the pre-processing, and then they will store the data back into MySQL. With the introduction of Heatwave ML, we are able to completely obviate the need for them to extract the data and store it back, because now it can all be done within the confines of the MySQL database, right? So that's an example of something which is being done externally. So I feel there's a lot of opportunity for machine learning, and particularly with MySQL Heatwave, we find that customers are consolidating multiple MySQL databases into one. People are consolidating data from other databases into one because it does a good job of analytics. And one of the prerequisites for machine learning is that people need to have data, right? Or machine learning algorithms require data. And now with MySQL Heatwave, there's a lot more data, and there's a lot more opportunity now to run machine learning effectively.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your insightful inputs on this particular topic. It was very enlightening to speak to you, Nipun. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rahul, for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.